Okay, so with no further ado, just going to introduce Michelle. So thank you so much for being with us today, Michelle. Professor Michelle Harvie is a research dietitian from the Prevent Breast Cancer Research Unit at Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust and the University of Manchester. She qualified as a dietitian in 1991 and was awarded a PhD for studies of weight gain in cancer patients in the year 2000. For the past 25 years, she has researched optimum diet and exercise strategies for the prevention and management of breast cancer. This research includes one of the first reports that weight loss can reduce breast cancer risk, pioneering work with intermittent fasting and delivering breast cancer prevention interventions to women attending high-risk clinics and breast screening. Professor Harvie is a member of the NIHR Diet and Activity Research Translation Collaboration and reviews for many cancer journals and funding bodies. I'm going to hand over to you now, Michelle. I'm really excited for your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, am I sharing my slides now? Yeah. Hang on. What can possibly go wrong? Delighted to talk to you today about my research journey and how, as a research dietitian, I've been involved in clinical research. And I have to say, I've just had such a privileged journey, and I really, really wish other people have these opportunities. So, oh gosh, now it's not moving forward. Gosh, why is that? Okay. Oh, I just don't know how to, like the normal things you do to move it forward are not working. Oh, hang on. Okay, is that moving?
Yes, that looks good.
Right, so sorry. Okay, so I'm going to whiz through what my journey's been and then share with you a bit more detail about the breast cancer research that you just heard about, the work we've done with intermittent diets, and then how I digressed into diabetes research, and cover, you know, the highs and the challenges of research, and how really you could get involved. So I was brought up in Essex, in a little village in Essex called Danbury, and my parents were very supportive, but not scientists, and certainly not nutritionists. My mum was a very avid cook, and so it was constantly, the house was covered in cordon bleu books, if anyone's old enough to remember those. And also my dad was an avid reader, so there were lots and lots of books around. So I kind of grew up in this foodie book environment, and went to comprehensive school. I got my O-levels, realised that although I loved being in the village, I always wanted to go to university. I wanted to go to a city. So I realised that in my comprehensive school, nobody got A-levels. So I went to the local grammar school to do my A-levels, and actually was lucky enough to get a place at the University of Manchester to do a biochemistry degree. And I went to Manchester, I have to confess, because I was a mad, avid fan of the Smiths, who very sadly split up about a month after I started my degree and did a farewell concert in Manchester that I managed to miss. Anyway, I got my biochemistry degree, and then realised I was actually interested in clinical things. So I kind of returned to the food element of my upbringing, and I did a postgraduate diploma in dietetics, and then I haven't moved very far, you might notice in all of this, was a basic grade dietitian, a band 7 dietitian at Manchester Royal Infirmary, which of course is now part of MFT. But when I was doing that, I was always wondering why we were doing certain things. And a lot of the stuff we were doing wasn't evidence-based. So I was always had lots of questions. And I had some very inspiring dietitians, as Claire Soulsby pictured here, who was a fantastic mentor. And there was an opportunity to do a PhD. Now, in those days, they weren't fully funded PhDs. You actually were on student stipend. So I gave up my band 7 salary and actually went to do a PhD with not dietitians or nutritionists even, but some oncologists and an anaesthetist who had an opportunity to do a PhD in, actually it was testing low phenylalanine diets in cancer patients. And long story short, the diet just didn't work. Nobody would do it. So I had to digress, and I ended up doing a lot of metabolic work about patterns of body composition gain and weight gain and dietary intakes and physical activity of cancer, different types of cancer patients. And I got my PhD. And then I was still very avidly keen to carry on in a research career, but of course it's not always a natural step into research when you've done a PhD. And so I ended up going back into clinical practice for a year. But then I had an opportunity. Professor Howell, who was one of my PhD mentors, who's a breast oncologist, actually had an opportunity for a research dietitian post for a year in 2001. And that's what I took up, and that's what I'm still doing. So that year's contract sort of got extended and extended and extended. And then a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, I was awarded an honorary chair, mask chair, at the university. So it's been a slightly, perhaps not the pathway you might take now. I think the pathway now might be maybe a bit more straightforward. But it's enabled me to do some fantastic work. So most of my work's focused on how we might reduce the risk of breast cancer. And so I've had the opportunity to work with lots of different types of researchers, not just nutritionists. So it's been around how we define the risk factors using sort of observational studies, looking at mechanisms, and then how, perhaps where my dietetics come in, how can we help people adhere to some of these recommendations and help them control their weight. So what about defining risk factors? Well, I was lucky enough to be at a conference in Washington, a cancer prevention conference. And at that point, we already knew there was lots and lots of data that being overweight or obese increased the risk of breast cancer. And I was sitting in the audience of a presentation by a guy called Tom Sellers, who worked on the Iowa Women's Health Study, a big population cohort study. And he presented all this data about weight and risk of breast cancer. And then I was sitting there thinking, yes, but what can we do about that? And I asked the question, which I thought was a very, very obvious question, but do we know whether weight loss reverses that risk? And I was slightly taken aback when he said, oh, we've never thought of that. That's a really interesting question. And I thought, well, it's probably the most obvious question. But anyway, delightful collaborative researcher and research group. And we worked with them. And basically, using their data, we were able to show that actually weight loss did reverse a lot of the risk that people accumulate by gaining weight. So that was quite a groundbreaking thing. And then, of course, it gave me a lever to then research weight loss interventions, because we thought that would be helping reduce their risk. So the other thing I've been involved with is, so if weight increases risk and weight loss reduces it, how does it do it? And it's really important to know that, because partly it strengthens that cancer prevention message that we can give to the public and to other healthcare professionals. One of the problems we have in cancer is we don't have a good biomarker of risk. So for cardiovascular disease, we've got cholesterol, but for breast cancer risk, if I get someone to lose weight, there's nothing really I can measure that tells me that her risk of breast cancer is going down. And that's what we're always trying to find, because that's really, really useful. And then, again, if we find the mechanisms, we might be able to find drugs that might mimic the effect of weight loss. And so this is a really busy slide, but don't worry about it. I've been involved with quite a number of what we call mechanistic diet studies, where we're not researching lab animals or lab rats. We've literally got women who have volunteered to go on certain diets and have a breast biopsy. They're healthy women, they've not got breast cancer, have a breast biopsy at the start and then after the period of dieting and losing weight. And we've measured all sorts of things. So we've done 4 studies, and in fact, one of them actually involved breast and endometrial biopsies. And these have shown some quite interesting biological changes actually within the cells themselves. that indicate that risk is going down. And part of the work we did, we were trying to see whether we could find blood markers that might reflect some of these things. Obviously, you're not going to keep biopsying people who are in a dietary intervention, apart from in a research study. It's not something you would use clinically, but we were unable to show the changes we see in the breast. We were wondering whether you might see those changes in gene expression in perhaps the white blood cells that you can easily measure, but we didn't. So I think, but we have shown, quite plausible biological reasons why weight loss is reducing their risk, and reducing inflammation and some of the proliferative effects that lead to increased risk of breast cancer. So that's been really interesting. So basically, I design the studies, deliver the interventions with my team of dietitians, and then we send the samples off to these fantastic researchers that are all down the side. So Rob Clark, Andy Sims, Roy Goodacre, and Richard Unwin, who've looked at gene expression, proteomics, metabolomics, etc. And it's been a really nice partnership, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So I guess going back to sort of more pure dietetic research, so how can we help people? We know that weight loss might help them, but how can we help them follow these recommendations? And so we all know that losing weight is difficult. Let's forget the GLP-1 agonists. These weren't around when I started. Sticking to a diet is difficult. And I was really intrigued again by some animal research that an intermittent way of dieting. So if you fed the mouse, if the mouse had a much lower calorie intake on a couple of days a week and then ate normally the rest of the time, it had a better cancer protective effect than if it was just restricted across the week. And so, of course, restricting across the week is what we normally do when we put someone on a weight loss diet. If they go to Weight Watchers or Slimming World, you're generally reducing someone's calorie intake by about a quarter, trying to do it every day. And I wondered if, well, maybe there's this interesting biology about having spells of a much lower calorie restriction that evoke different biological effects, but also behaviorally, is it easier for people to just focus on dieting a couple of days a week and not the rest of the time? So bring on our first research on intermittent diet, the 5-2 diet, which we started researching in 2005. So what's that, over 20 years ago? And I wanted to keep it really simple. So the first diet was basically milk. It was about 650 calories for 2 days a week, and it was milk and vegetables. And believe you me, there are lots of things you can do with milk and vegetables. So we had 104 women who were randomized to either a daily diet or this intermittent diet. And we certainly showed it was feasible, 75% adherence over 6 months. The weight loss was similar, but the intermittent group did seem to have a greater reduction in insulin resistance, which we think could be important for cancer risk. Now, this finding was all over the news. I was on the TV. You've got the Sun there, big 2-day diet cuts the big C. They were getting slightly ahead of the data. What we showed was that this diet actually probably wasn't a bad thing, and that there might be some way that this could actually help people lose weight. But we knew that, there's only so much you can do with milk and veg, and over time people get fed up. So the second form of the intermittent R5-2 diet, which we published in 2013. And so this was actually 2 days of a low carb, low calorie diet. And that was actually, people found that much easier to do. And so this is the diet that we kind of use now. And of course, this was all the work that led to Michael Mosley's 5-2 diet. So kind of we did develop it in Manchester, but it got slightly hijacked. But of course, the rest is history, because a lot of people are still doing it. And it all went a bit crazy. So we actually published some books on our diet, which all the proceeds go to Prevent Breast Cancer, the charity. the book was translated in 18 countries. We went to Tony, Professor Howell and myself went down. We were on QVC's shopping channel where we sold out on 2 occasions. And so, you know, and the paper that our first intermittent diet paper has got 1,298 citations. And so, you know, it was a big deal and everyone was really interested in it. And actually, I think they probably still are. So that was our intermittent diet in cancer prevention. So another question that I've had was, so we have a diet that people, you know, can follow, but we're always trying to engage people that are at higher risk of breast cancer, for not because of their weight, but for other reasons like genetic reasons, because you're going to get a much bigger reduction in breast cancer risk if across a population if you target higher risk people. And so I think there's an assumption in health that if somebody knows they're at higher risk of a disease, they're going to just change their health behaviours. You know, they're going to stop smoking, follow a healthy diet. There's an assumption, but there's actually absolutely no evidence for that. And so there's been some very good studies of that in risk giving research. But I think people are asking the wrong question, because we know that it's very difficult to stop smoking or follow a healthy diet long term without support. And so my question for this piece of work was, does knowing your risk make you more inclined to join a weight loss program, which can then help you lose weight? And that's what we did in this ProCast lifestyle study. And so so the women had been told at breast screening whether they were at high, moderate or average or low risk of breast cancer. And you can clearly see that the higher risk women had a better uptake to the programme. They did tend to stay in the programme, and they generally lost more weight. So I think just telling someone they're at high risk doesn't work, but it might help them get in a programme that can help. So we've also done a lot of work with the intermittent diet in women who are going through treatment for breast cancer, where there has been a lot of interest about whether fasting around the time of chemo makes it more effective and less toxic, which would be fantastic. So we've done a few of these, what we call our breast activity health eating after diagnosis studies. And so this is women who have got early breast cancer going through chemotherapy, and they were randomized to either an intermittent or a daily diet. And we were interested in what effect, because these women generally gain weight and body fat. And so we were interested to see whether the intermittent diet could help control that, and what effect it would have on the toxicity. And so the intermittent diet did seem better in this group for weight control, and there was less severe chemotherapy toxicity, particularly in the later stages of the chemotherapy. So that was interesting. And then we more recently published this study, which was Spearhead 3, where we were actually looking at whether the intermittent diet could actually help affect the disease process and increase time to progression for women with metastatic breast cancer. So these women are not curable, but they have a period of treatment, and this was chemotherapy, for as long as it keeps working. And once it stops working, then they go on to another treatment. And so this study, Spearhead 3, was randomizing people to either the intermittent diet plus resistance exercise, because we wanted them to really maintain their lean body mass, or just resistance exercise. And we were looking at actually the disease process, you know, time to disease progression, as well as toxicity and other things. And we so uptake was reasonable if people were asked. There was a lot of gatekeeping. But actually, the study got killed by COVID. We were trying to recruit 134 patients, but we only got 68, but we had to stop it during COVID. It was recruiting across a huge number of centres across the UK. But basically what we showed, and we published this later last year, was that the intermittent dieters did have longer on the chemotherapy, and they did lose some weight, but they also did longer on on the chemotherapy. And this was a sort of phase 2 screening trial. So it's not a fully blown powered randomized trial, but it does indicate that there's a signal there that actually for women with overweight or obesity who have secondary breast cancer, that a diet may help. So just before I go on to how you can get involved, so obviously most of my work is around breast cancer. I have digressed into doing diabetes research, and I have to be honest, mainly because I had a fantastic dietitian, Sarah, who worked with me, who was really interested in it. And so I kind of went with her interest and worked with her and Basilisa, one of the endocrinologists at MFT. And so we've done a number of studies, again, of intermittent diets, but we've focused it in a different research, different clinical area. And so we've done these MIDAS studies. So MIDAS 2 was around, you may be familiar that actually there's a daily low-calorie diet program that is now rolled out, the low-calorie diet program for diabetes remission, which is, every day for 12 weeks, you have an 800-calorie diet. But we know that only a quarter of people sign up for it because it's a bit daunting. And so MIDAS 2 was looking at whether you could do 2 days a week for 28 weeks, rather than actually we had 8 weeks of a low-calorie diet, or 2 days a week of it, so you're spreading it. You're only doing it 2 days a week rather than 7, but you're spreading it out. And we did show that the weight loss was similar over 12 months, but actually there did seem to be slightly more remission with the continuous diet. We've also done work in type 1, where there's an increasing obesity problem, and there's a sort of reticence to do weight loss. And so we showed that intermittent or continuous diets were both safe in this population with monitoring, and reduced weight and HbA1c. And more recently, we did some work with gestational diabetes, where actually we were trying the intermittent diet during that last trimester of pregnancy when these women have gestational diabetes. And sadly, but perhaps predictably, we did show that the women really struggled to do the diet during that. There was a big dropout, and the adherence to the diet was low, much lower than I ever see with people going through chemotherapy. So I think that is a population where we need other ideas. So it's been, it is, and it's been just such a pleasure to be around, do research and be around such motivated and interesting clinicians, scientists, and patients. It's always interesting and varied. You've got the opportunity to change practice. One of the highlights, I think, always as a researcher is spending time just chatting to other researchers, going to conferences if you can. The patients generally that come in research are often really motivated to get the chance to see them again. You see whether they're doing an intervention, you see what effect it has on them. And it's the joy of being around other enthusiastic dietitians and students. But it can be really hard work. Everything's interesting, so you end up taking on too much. It can be slightly frustrating that it takes so long to get research off the ground and then for an intervention to get into practice. Temporary research contracts is a real issue. One of my longer term dietitians actually left because she couldn't get a mortgage because she had a temporary research contract. And, it is a school of, you get some highs, but you do get a lot of hard knocks. You'll get bad reviews. You'll get rejections on grants that you've spent 6 months working on. And everything takes longer than you think. Everything. It takes me longer than you think. And everything, actually, I have to say, is becoming more and more bureaucratic, I guess. There's a lot more hoops you have to jump through, but just keep jumping. You will get there. And it's a team effort. I'm a dietitian, but I've only been able to do this research because I'm part of a clinical team. I'm part of the cancer prevention team. I'm part of the breast oncology. I'm part of the diabetes team. And I've had I have some fantastic colleagues that I've worked with, and research dietitians, and also sort of support staff. We've had fantastic admin and project management staff and statistics. You know, we've always getting help from statistics, and I've more recently had a lot of support from the Biomedical Research Centre in Manchester, which is a fantastic resource. I know people have a lot of concerns about getting into research, and these are some of the barriers I think I often hear. But you know, you don't have to be great at numbers, you know, because there's somebody else that will be. You just have to have ideas and be enthusiastic, and you can still see patients. It's not you're going to spend all your time just reading books. And so, you know, I've been lucky enough to have, you know, lots of research dietitians that have worked with me, not necessarily to come and do higher degrees, but they've ended up doing masters or PhDs, you know, in this sort of clinical dietetic research. And more recently, there's been this fantastic scheme where allied healthcare professionals have a paid placement by the Biomedical Research Centre, which is for, I think it's for like 35 days over over a year, or you can sort of pinch it up, and that's been amazing. And so I've had some fantastic dietitians that have worked on that. You've already, I think Jude's already showed you some opportunities, but you know, there's lots of information now out there about how allied health professionals can get into research, this Kappa group. And I say this BRC placement, they're not actually advertising anymore in Manchester until the next BRC starts, which will be, you know, a couple of years or year and a half's time. But, you know, they can be really fantastic. And this is just an example of Laura, who came to work with me. So she got the opportunity to help set up a study and use all the different research tools, etc. Helped set up a REDCap database, which was no mean feat. And then we've just got a protocol paper written that she's first author on. So, you know, there are real opportunities, and NIHR has a wealth of information, and I've just literally screenshotted. There's a lot of training courses to get people to help you sort of get the idea of what research is about. And then, so we just go on the NIHR allied health professional. There are a lot of resources specifically designed for allied health professionals. And then there's lots of career development awards. So there's pre-doc, doctoral, postdoc, etc. And I put this, there was a really nice schema, and it's actually closed now, but I don't know if it will run again, which is a kind of clinical academic internship, which looked really good, but unfortunately it is now closed. But whether they'll advertise another one, but there's always new opportunities coming out. It's quite hard to keep on top of it. So some final thoughts. I think, you know, I've been so lucky, you know, don't be afraid to ask. There's no such thing as a silly question. Don't be afraid to ask questions of why people are doing something, or can we do this? You know, like what I thought was a silly question in that conference about weight loss turned out to be a really important paper and a scientific, you know, a sort of, you know, clinical breakthrough. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Think laterally. Don't just think because you work in diabetes or musculoskeletal, in cystic or whatever, that's where, you know, your work sits. You know, a lot of the work we do can apply to other clinical situations. Now you can't really see me because it's on Teams, but height is not a barrier to success, and that is a picture of me with two of my colleagues, Andrew Renahan and Steve Hursting, just showing how well. Actually, they're quite tall, but I am quite short. So, you know, you can get on even as a short woman, and you just have to be resilient and try. You know, it's great if you have a great support network out of work, because you do need to get out of work, but also in work. And just to finish off, so I came to Manchester way back when, because I wanted to do a degree, but also because I was madly into the Smiths, who I never got to see. But in 2006, Andy Rourke, who was the bass player in the Smiths, had set up a cancer prevention charity, and called Manchester versus Cancer, and he actually came to the Nightingale Centre where I work to donate some money for some research that we were actually doing, which was fantastic. So he came into the centre. I brought in my vinyl hat full of hollow, which he very gracefully signed, and then I actually that was when we'd just written a diet book, and he got a signed copy of that from me, and it was fantastic. So, you know, you do get these amazing experiences. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. So I suppose just to put it out to the group, if you have any questions for Michelle, please put those in the Q&A and we will make sure she gets those. So I was really curious, Michelle, listening to your story. I thought it was really interesting, that thing that you said about asking that sort of obvious question. And I was, and you know, getting the answer back that hadn't even occurred to them, even though it seemed so obvious to you. And I was wondering, what is it? Because I think there's a lot of people who also have questions like that they think are so obvious and they're afraid to ask. So what tips would you have for somebody who finds it really hard to ask questions and is worried about coming across as being stupid? Because sometimes you ask the obvious question and you sort of get your hand bitten off. You know, do you know what I mean? You get snapped at because
Yeah,
you're told
I
it's a stupid
guess
question.
I guess it's the way, and sometimes no, there isn't such thing as a stupid. I don't believe there's such thing as a stupid question, although I've probably asked a lot in the over my years. I think you just have to do it with that maybe, or this may be a stupid question, but I think if you know, if you stand up like, oh, me, I've got a really important. I think it's just being slightly, yeah, honest about, yeah, oh, yeah. I think so. It's yeah, but I think, and also just that belief that, you know, we all, you know, God, I'm the master of stupid questions, you know, I'm sure. But I think it doesn't, it shouldn't matter. And I know it's always very hard, I think, to ask questions at conferences and things. And maybe, you know, I think now it's probably easier because you have to have, you know, if you don't get the opportunity to ask them at the time, you can do a follow-up email or something, can't you? But I think just, yeah, just go for it. Yeah, and I didn't get my head, but I think it's so weird. I think, how did you not think of that? But I guess he's an epidemiologist, so he's looking for risk factors and not looking for clinical I don't know. I couldn't quite work it out whether it was just being polite. Anyway, but I think that's it. I think just sort of, yeah, be slightly, yeah, kind of acknowledge that it may be a stupid question, but go for it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're aware of is that around 3 to 4% of medics consider themselves clinical academics, and yet less than 1% of non-medical healthcare professionals do. And I would be interested, you know, someone who sort of forged a clinical academic career and had some really interesting experiences. Why do you think that there is that difference?
And I certainly, and I think when I first started in doing my PhD in dietetics, I, you know, I was the outsider. I absolutely was the outsider. And I used to get introduced as, oh, Michelle's a dietitian. She's not a normal dietitian, she's a clever dietitian. What? Which was kind of a compliment, but you know,
Oh,
and so I had
wow.
to earn my place at the table. But you know, I could have just, there were times I did actually come home and cry sometimes because I was getting so I don't know whether that's necessarily, I'm not sure it's necessarily like that anymore, but I think it's just confidence, isn't it? And we need, I guess that's it, we need to see other dietitians who have managed to do that, and we can do it, you know, but you can't do it on your own. You've got to be part of a team. And actually now when I look around, I see other dietitians doing great research, but they're always part of a clinical, and the clinical team really respects what they're doing. And so yeah, I think it's better now. But yeah, you just have to, you know, you have to believe in what you're doing really, and you do have absolutely unique skills. And you know, a lot of the people you will have to work with the clinicians, but they won't necessarily know they won't know the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, but you need to kind of work out how it fits into what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. What would you advise people in terms of mentorship? Has having a mentor been an important thing in your career or not so much?
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. And my mentor was, and actually I probably didn't give as much great mention to Professor Howell, who was one of the supervisors for my PhD, who then took me on to this role. So I've been mentored by him. So he's not a nutritionist. So in a sense, I feel like I've kind of missed out on perhaps some of that dietetic. And I probably should have triangulated that actually in hindsight. But he was a fantastic mentor in that, all the skills of always had time, encouraging, harsh sometimes, push, made you work, and also, could be, your critical friend if you like. But I think it's probably good to have a mentor that's, yeah, I think you need a few mentors actually. I think you need one in your own discipline, but also in the, whether you're a physio or a dietitian, or and one sort of in the clinical area that you're working on. I think that would be ideal. Yeah.
And so I suppose people use the term mentor in different ways as well. Sometimes it's used almost in terms of like a supervisor or a senior collaborator, and other times it's used in the idea of somebody who isn't directly involved in your research in any way,
Yeah.
but can advise you more on your
That's,
career.
I guess that's what I was thinking about. Yeah, somebody who's like completely independent that can kind of helicopter in and go, hang on a minute. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
sort of having both of those roles is important in your
I
view.
think so. Yeah. And must admit, I've probably not had that, but I think I can see that that would be really, really, really useful. And also just keeping up with all the new opportunities. So, I, did a PhD, which was a real gamble, back in, um, where are we? 1994. But I gave up my salary. I was taking home like, oh, I don't know, £10,000 or something, which was worth a little bit more then. But I did take quite a big pay cut to do it. But you don't, that's not how it goes now. You can get fully funded fellowships, which is fantastic. And there are more and more coming out, or there were. Hopefully they'll keep rolling. Yeah. So I think the opportunities are there now, but you've still got to, yeah. And I guess my initial thing, I did a master's in my own time when I was a dietitian that then gave me a leg up to do a PhD. So I don't know, it's nice to think you can do all of this just in a normal work time. I think it's challenging. If you're really organized, I'm sure you can, um, get that time off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're coming up to the end of our time today. Thank you so much, Michelle. Is there any parting words that you'd want to give people here today to sort of encourage them on their way?
I think just, yeah, I think just, it's a fantastic career. And now if you can do a career that's like, half clinical, half research, it's absolutely, you have to keep that clinical foot in the door. You can't just go into your ivory tower. You have to do the both. So, we're fantastically placed to do that. So just, yeah, just go for it. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions or talk to anybody, if that's helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And thanks everybody for joining. It's great to have had you.